Hello. I could have done this podcast about two things regarding women and babies. The first is that in Massachusetts, the home of the Puritans, they've now made abortion legal up until the moment of birth. In theory, a woman could be in labor with a perfectly healthy child who will be born alive and grow up well, and the doctor can puncture that baby's brain, vacuum it out, and dismember it and throw it away. Moloch walks in Massachusetts. The other is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's weird announcement that she will definitely run for president because she's freezing her eggs to control her reproductive system. Obviously, she's saying, you don't have to worry about me being morning sick or nursing a baby or going into labor while I'm president. And of course, when she leaves office at 50, she'll probably hire a surrogate to have a baby that will biologically be hers long after she shouldn't be having babies. Interesting, tragic, disturbing, but I don't have a lot to add. Instead, I wanted to talk about something that's to me more interesting, which is that Hasan Piker, who is in many ways now the face of the Islamo-Democrat socialist movement in America, was caught not long ago, because he hasn't been podcasting that long, saying derogatory things about blacks. Here's that video.
I don't give a what black people care about. Oh, black people care about this, black people care about that. Like, shut the up. That's not how politics works. Oh, well, Hasan, how dare you? Like it or not, black people care about this issue. It's like, it's such a stupid stance. Any other black folk want to engage in radical activist language in this fucking chat? Suck my Yes, dude. It's because I'm racist. That's why. It's because I'm racist, dude. Go back to a better time when lynchings were happening. This is what I like as a black man. Are you always doing too much with black people? Leave them alone. I want to go back to lynching. Like, I get it, but relax. Man, shut the up, okay? God damn. You got me, okay? You got me because I'm a racist person.
Piker loves China, and China, a good communist country, doesn't like blacks, as this commercial from China from a few years ago shows. If you're not watching the video, it shows a black man leaning into a smiling Asian woman for a kiss, and instead of kissing him, she seems receptive. She pops a tablet in his mouth, a laundry tablet, pops him in the washing machine, and he comes out as a beautiful, white-skinned Chinese man. Very racist. What I want to focus on, though, is the fact that Hasan Piker's incredible hostility to blacks is very consistent with non-black Islam. And what I am using to make that point, to focus on that, is the history of the African slave trade, along with example here, I'm getting it queued up for me, along with examples of just general racism against black Africans, whether Muslim or not, in the Islamic world. So I keep getting my terms muddled. I'd actually recorded this before, and I kept talking about Arabs. But of course, the Ottoman Turks were not Arabs. They were Turkic people, but they were non-black Muslims. So for clarity, I'm going to refer to blacks and Muslims. And I understand that there are black Muslims and that Muslims can be Arab and non-Arab, but this is my lexicon for this video is blacks refers to all people in Africa who were of sub-Saharan black descent in one way or the other, and Muslim refers to the entire non-black Muslim world that was involved in the slave trade or in other depredations against blacks. I did research on ChatGPT, which yields good answers if you ask the right questions and do not allow it to politically correct you into a corner. And what I wanted to learn about was the slave trade in Africa, and the answer it came back with was enormously detailed. But the gist of it is that the Muslims have been involved in the African slave trade since not long after Muhammad's death. Now, they may well have been involved in it before Muhammad's life, but that's not what I asked for. But what's clear is that Muslims have been a major part of the African slave trade for 1,200 years, from about 700 AD to about 1900 AD. Africa is a huge continent, and there were different aspects to the slave trade. There were always the blacks in the interior, both Muslim and very frequently non-Muslim, who brought the slaves to market. They captured them. They raided villages. They were prisoners of war, whatever. So there's always been a black involvement in the slave trade, which leftists like to ignore. But very often, especially beginning in the 1700s, the traders, the actual people who were running the marketplaces, were Muslims, black and non-black. I wanted to talk about the non-black ones. First of all, we know beginning in about 1700, Zanzibar and other kingdoms became deeply involved in the slave trade and became very prominent, which is where we have the impression, we have lithographs and etchings and things showing slave markets run by Muslims with dejected slaves there. What's interesting is how many passed through there and where did they end up? And what I discovered doing this research, some of it surprised me, some of it didn't. For one thing, we have no idea how many blacks passed through the slave markets in the pre-European era because there were no records kept. We know that there were a lot of them. There were, for example, the Ottoman Turks took just 1.2 million, I think, Christians as slaves. And meanwhile, they were also across the Ottoman Empire. They were running vast slave trades. It turns out that there were very different types of slave trades going into the European colonies and going into the Muslim Middle East. The European colonies needed hard labor. The economics were that they wanted hard labor. And so while they brought in women, they primarily brought in men and they brought in women. And because the importation was expensive, especially in the Americas, they actually encouraged the African slaves to have relationships and have children because it created more slaves. And of course, their skin was the best badge that you could have, that they were all slaves. So that's why we in the West have so many descendants who are manifestly, even though almost all American descendants of slaves have white blood in them, they're also manifestly of African descent. It's not so obvious in the Muslim world. Uncounted millions, probably tens of millions, more than tens of million. I mean, who knows how many blacks ended up in the Muslim world, in the Arab world, in other parts of throughout Africa, but in the Muslim world that was not black, across the Middle East, across the Turkic Muslim world, in North Africa, as far away as Spain, wherever there were Muslims, there were black slaves. They did not make as much of a genetic impression. Typical for Muslims, they imported more women than men. For one, they wanted sex. They were concubines. I mean, the number of women who vanished into the Muslim world is amazing. But they also wanted people who acted as house servants and were not a risk of rising up. Men were very often, if they did hard labor, they were not allowed to have sex with women of any kind, and they were often turned into eunuchs, or they were sent to war. They were trained to be warriors, and also a lot of them died in the passage. I mean, if you think how many died coming to the Caribbean and Latin America and North America, I can bet you that starting in 700 AD, a lot more died going into the Muslim world. But it is one aspect of the fact that Islam had no respect for blacks, even Muslim blacks. The other aspect of this that I found, so that's a short version of what was going on. And this slave trade, as I said, controlled in many, many areas entirely by non-black Muslims, no respecter of skin color. But there's also, let me scooch down here because this is a retread of an earlier video where I got my terms confused, which is why I was so careful to say black versus Muslim. The other thing that I wanted to point out is that there's still a massive amount of Muslim disdain and even genocidal hatred for blacks. The best example is the Sudanese civil war and the conflict in Darfur, where Arab Muslims went on such a slaughter of black Muslims within Sudan that it was officially declared a genocide. In the International Criminal Court, in the years before it became just focused entirely on Israel, actually pursued genocide charges against the Sudanese president Omar al-Bashir. So that was a big thing. And that civil war spilled over into, let me see where my notes about that are. I've got all these notes and I was just shooting through. But it spilled into Mauritania and it spilled into eastern Chad. And there was another genocide of blacks there by non-black Muslims. Also in 1989 and through 1991 in Mauritania, the non-black Muslims went on a genocide against the black Muslims. So that was very, very common. In addition, Muslims are derogatory about blacks, much as Hasan Piker was. For example, Tunisian President Kais Saied in February 2023 was speaking out about sub-Saharan African migrants, and he described them as connected to violence, criminality, and an actual plan to alter Tunisia's demographic character. He spoke of hordes of undocumented sub-Saharan migrants. And what was interesting is that he said that this threatened Tunisia's identity as part of the, quote, Arab and Islamic world. So even if these migrants, and I'm betting, I haven't researched it, but I'm betting, even if many of them were Muslim, there was no kindred feeling of we're all in Islam together in the caliphate. Blacks not wanted in Tunisia. And they were actually harassed mightily after the president made this statement. Likewise, there was what happened in Sudan. And just this past, right now, in August, the entourage of Dubai ruler and UAE Prime Minister Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum was in London. And they were approached by someone protesting UAE involvement in Sudan. And one of the Sheikh's entourage, not the Sheikh himself, responded to one of the female protesters with a string of obscenities and called her a black female dog. So he could have just insulted her, but her race mattered to him. So there's a lot of that. And the other thing that was very interesting was, according to ChatGPT, if you go back through Muslim literature, you find a lot of derogatory stereotypes about blacks. And again, it doesn't distinguish between Muslims and non-Muslims, but it called them, it associated them with bad climate change. That was always an issue. Too much rain, too little rain. Blame the blacks. Servility, being naturally servile, or just being stupid. So not everybody in the Islamic world was saying it, but it was not an uncommon attitude. Why this? As I said, I suspect the distinction about blacks versus other people. We've always insulted people. In America, you had the Polish jokes and the Italian jokes. People make ethnic and cultural jokes, but the unique animus and the willingness to enslave blacks, I think, has a lot to do with the fact that their skin color makes them absolutely distinctive. And once you have designated them as easy prey, which they were because their fellow skin color people were happy to turn them over to the slavers, then you retrofit a justification for enslaving them, just as happened in the American South, which is initially they tried Irish slaves who kept dying from malaria and the sun, so they switched to black slaves, and once that became embedded, then you didn't a post facto justification that, well, of course they were always meant to be slaves because yada, yada, yada. My point is, however, that blacks who think that the Islamo-Marxist nexus is going to be good for them are very mistaken, because if the Islamo gets the upper hand, Islam does not like blacks. It just doesn't. It has very little respect for them, and nothing Hasan Piker said was a surprise. And on that cheerful note, I'll see you next time.